Sir Marcus Blackwell had served the royal house of Valdoria for 15 years, earning his position as captain of the royal guard through unwavering loyalty and exceptional skill. The castle walls of Eldermere had become as familiar to him as his own reflection, every stone corridor and hidden passage mapped in his memory. On this particular autumn evening, the castle seemed unusually quiet. With most of the court attending the harvest festival in the village below, Princess Isabella, the king's beloved wife of 12 years, had claimed illness and remained behind. She was known throughout the kingdom for her grace, charity work, and devotion to the people. The common folk adored her, and even the most cynical nobles spoke of her with respect. Her marriage to King Edmund had been arranged for political alliance, but over the years, it had grown into what appeared to be genuine affection and partnership. Marcus was conducting his routine security sweep of the royal wing when he noticed something peculiar. A soft glow emanated from beneath the door of the Queen's private study, a room she rarely used in the evenings. More concerning was the sound of hushed voices, two distinct tones, one unmistakably feminine, the other decidedly masculine and unfamiliar. His training kicked in immediately, and he approached with the silent steps that had made him legendary among his peers. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, something that violated every security protocol he had established. Through the narrow gap, Marcus could see flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows on the ornate tapestries that lined the walls. His hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt as he positioned himself to observe without being detected. What he witnessed in the next few moments would forever change his understanding of the royal family he had sworn to protect. Princess Isabella stood near the grand fireplace, her usually pristine appearance disheveled in a way that spoke of intimate encounters. Her golden hair, typically arranged in elaborate court styles, fell loosely around her shoulders. Most shocking of all was her companion, Lord Adrian Ashford, the king's trusted advisor and closest friend since childhood. Adrian was a married man himself, with 3 young children and a reputation for moral uprightness that made him invaluable in diplomatic negotiations. The scene before Marcus was unmistakably romantic. Isabella's hand rested on Adrian's chest as they spoke in whispers, too low for him to discern the words. The way they looked at each other spoke of a familiarity that went far beyond appropriate court interaction. Adrian's fingers traced along Isabella's arm, with the confidence of someone who had done so many times before. The intimate atmosphere in the room was palpable, charged with an energy that made Marcus's stomach turn with the implications. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. Everything he had believed about honor, duty, and the sanctity of the royal marriage was crumbling before his eyes. The woman he had respected above all others, whom he had protected with his very life on multiple occasions, was engaged in the ultimate betrayal of her husband and king. The man who had been like a brother to King Edmund was participating in this deception with apparent ease and comfort. His mind raced through the possible explanations, desperately searching for an innocent interpretation of what he was witnessing. Perhaps this was some sort of political meeting that required secrecy? But the body language, the intimate proximity, the way Isabella's dress seemed hastily rearranged, all of it pointed to only one conclusion. This was an affair, and not a recent development judging by their comfortable familiarity with each other. The weight of this knowledge settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead cloak. As captain of the royal guard, his primary duty was to protect the king and the crown. But what did protection mean when the threat came from within the royal family itself? His oath of loyalty had never prepared him for a situation where the Queen's actions could potentially destabilize the entire kingdom. If this affair became public knowledge, it could spark succession crises, political upheaval, and even civil war. Marcus carefully stepped back from the door, his heart pounding so loudly he feared it might give away his presence. He needed time to think, to process what he had seen and determine his next course of action. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before him as he made his way back to his quarters. Each step weighted with the burden of a secret that could destroy the kingdom he had devoted his life to protecting. In his private chambers, Marcus sat heavily in his chair and stared at the dying embers in his fireplace. The festival sounds from the village below seemed to mock his turmoil, people celebrating their beloved royal family while unaware of the scandal brewing in the very heart of the castle. He thought of King Edmund, a fair and just ruler who had treated Marcus more like a friend than a servant. The king's trust in both his wife and his closest advisor was absolute. making this betrayal even more devastating. The night stretched ahead of him, filled with impossible choices and consequences that would ripple through the kingdom for generations to come. Sleep eluded Marcus entirely that night. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the stone ceiling while his mind churned through the implications of what he had witnessed. Every option seemed to lead to disaster. If he remained silent, he would be complicit in the Queen's betrayal of the king. If he spoke up, he would be responsible for potentially destroying the royal marriage and destabilizing the kingdom. The weight of this knowledge felt heavier than any armor he had ever worn. Dawn brought no clarity, only the harsh reality that he would need to face the royal family knowing their darkest secret. Marcus dressed with mechanical precision, adjusting his uniform with the same care he had shown for 15 years. Though everything felt different now, the familiar routine of morning inspections and briefings seemed surreal, as if he were watching someone else perform his duties while his mind remained trapped in that candlelit study. The great hall buzzed with activity as servants prepared for the day's court sessions. Princess Isabella entered with her usual grace, wearing a deep blue gown that complemented her golden hair, now perfectly arranged once again. She greeted the staff warmly, inquired about their families, and showed the same genuine concern that had always endeared her to the castle inhabitants. To any observer, she appeared to be the perfect queen, devoted wife, and caring ruler. Marcus found himself studying her face for signs of guilt or deception, but Isabella's composure was flawless. She met his eyes directly when she thanked him for maintaining security during the previous evening's festival, her smile warm and genuine. There was no hint of anxiety or awareness that her secret had been discovered. Either she was an exceptional actress, or she felt no guilt whatsoever about her actions. Lord Adrian arrived shortly after, looking equally composed and professional. He carried himself with the same confidence and dignity that had made him invaluable to the king's council. When he greeted Isabella, their interaction was perfectly appropriate. A respectful nod, a formal exchange of pleasantries, and the proper distance maintained between a married advisor and his queen. If Marcus hadn't witnessed their intimate encounter with his own eyes, he would never have suspected anything inappropriate between them. King Edmund's entrance commanded immediate attention from everyone in the hall. At 42, he remained an impressive figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying temples that added gravitas to his appearance. His subjects loved him for his fairness, his generals respected his strategic mind, and his friends treasured his loyalty. Marcus watched as Edmund approached his wife, placing a tender kiss on her forehead and asking about her health with genuine concern. The king's trust in those around him was absolute. He clasped Adrian's shoulder in greeting, their friendship evident in the easy familiarity of their interaction. Edmund spoke of state matters with Adrian while keeping one hand resting affectionately on Isabella's arm. The picture of domestic harmony and political unity was so convincing that Marcus began to question his own memory of the previous night's events. Throughout the morning's court sessions, Marcus observed the three of them with new eyes. Every glance between Isabella and Adrian seemed laden with hidden meaning, though they were careful never to look at each other when the king might notice. Their professional interactions contained subtle undercurrents that Marcus now recognized. The way Adrian's voice softened slightly when addressing the queen, how Isabella's fingers lingered a moment too long when passing documents to him, the almost imperceptible smile that crossed her lips when Adrian made witty observations during council discussions. The most painful moments came when Marcus witnessed King Edmund's obvious affection for both his wife and his best friend. The king would place his arm around Isabella's waist while discussing policy with Adrian, completely unaware that he was embracing the woman who betrayed him while consulting with the man who cuckolded him. Edmund's trust was so complete, so innocent, that Marcus felt physically ill watching these interactions. As the day progressed, Marcus began to notice other details that had previously escaped his attention. Isabella and Adrian never seemed surprised to encounter each other in various parts of the castle, suggesting a level of coordination in their movements. They had developed subtle signals. A particular way Isabella would touch her necklace that seemed to indicate something to Adrian, how he would adjust his rings in response to her gestures. These small communications spoke of a relationship that had been developing over considerable time. The realization that this affair had likely been ongoing for months Possibly years made Marcus's burden even heavier. How many times had he unknowingly facilitated their meetings by adjusting guard rotations? How many of Isabella's private requests for altered schedules had actually been opportunities for secret rendezvous? The thought that he might have been an unwitting accomplice to their deception added another layer of anguish to his moral dilemma. During the afternoon, Marcus received a routine request from Princess Isabella to modify the evening guard positions. She explained that she would be working late in her study and preferred minimal disruption. The request seemed innocent enough. She often worked on correspondence or charitable projects in the evenings. But now Marcus understood the true purpose. She was creating another opportunity for a private meeting with Adrian, and she expected Marcus to facilitate it unknowingly. Standing in the corridor where he had first discovered their secret, Marcus faced his moment of truth. He could honor her request and become a willing participant in their deception, or he could find a way to prevent the meeting without revealing his knowledge. Neither option felt honorable, and both carried consequences that would reverberate far beyond this single evening. The sun was setting over the kingdom of Valdoria, casting long shadows through the castle windows. In a few hours, Marcus would need to make a choice that would define not only his own future, but potentially the fate of the entire realm. The weight of loyalty, duty, honor, and love pressed down upon him as he prepared for what might be the most important night of his career as protector of the crown. The decision came to Marcus in a moment of clarity that surprised him with its simplicity. He would not modify the guard rotations as Isabella had requested. Instead, he would maintain the regular patrol schedule, ensuring that guards would pass by her study at their usual intervals. If Isabella and Adrian chose to meet despite the increased risk of discovery, that would be their choice. He would not facilitate their affair, but neither would he actively sabotage it by posting guards specifically to catch them. This middle path felt like the most honorable option available to him. Though Marcus knew it was far from perfect, he was buying himself time to decide on a more permanent solution, while avoiding becoming an active participant in either the deception or its exposure. The ethical complexity of his situation weighed heavily on his conscience, but at least he could sleep knowing he had chosen the least compromising path forward. Evening arrived with an unusual tension that seemed to permeate the entire castle. Marcus conducted his rounds with heightened awareness, noting every detail, every person's location, every unusual sound. The king had retired to his private chambers to review diplomatic correspondence, trusting as always in his wife's explanation that she needed quiet time for her charitable work. The innocent faith in Edmund's voice when he bid Isabella good night nearly broke Marcus's resolve to remain neutral in this terrible situation. At precisely 10 o'clock, Marcus observed Lord Adrian making his way through the castle corridors with practiced stealth. The advisor moved with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times before, avoiding the main passages and utilizing servants' routes that would minimize his chances of encountering other nobles or guards. His familiarity with these hidden paths revealed just how long this affair had been developing under everyone's noses. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the approach to the Queen's study without being detected. The regular guard patrol would pass this way in 20 minutes, giving the lovers a brief window of opportunity if they chose to take the risk. He found himself hoping that the threat of discovery would be enough to deter them, that perhaps seeing the unchanged security arrangements would make them reconsider their dangerous liaison. His hopes were quickly dashed. Adrian reached the study door and knocked with a subtle pattern that was obviously a prearranged signal. The door opened immediately, suggesting that Isabella had been waiting for him. Marcus caught a glimpse of her silhouette in the candlelight before the door closed softly behind Adrian. They had chosen to proceed despite the risk, demonstrating either remarkable recklessness or an overwhelming passion that clouded their judgment. The next 20 minutes felt like hours to Marcus. He remained at his observation post, acutely aware that two of the most important people in the kingdom were betraying their oaths and obligations mere yards away from him. The weight of his knowledge seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, and he began to question whether his neutral stance was actually a form of cowardice rather than wisdom. When the patrol guards approached, Marcus made a split-second decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of allowing them to follow their regular route past the study door, He intercepted them and redirected their patrol to a different section of the castle. He told himself that he was preventing a catastrophe that could destabilize the entire kingdom. But deep down he knew he was actively protecting the queen's secret and enabling her betrayal of the king. The guards accepted his redirection without question. His authority was absolute in matters of castle security. They disappeared down another corridor, leaving the lovers safe in their private meeting. Marcus returned to his post, now fully complicit in the affair he had discovered. The line he had tried so carefully to walk had been crossed, and there was no returning to his previous position of moral neutrality. Through the slightly open window of a nearby chamber, Marcus could hear fragments of conversation from the study. Isabella's voice carried the tone of someone discussing serious matters, while Adrian's responses suggested they were planning something beyond their immediate romantic encounter. The realization that their relationship might involve political dimensions as well as personal ones added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. As midnight approached, Marcus heard movement from within the study. Adrian emerged first, checking the corridor carefully before making his stealthy exit. Isabella appeared briefly in the doorway, watching him disappear into the shadows before closing the door and presumably retiring to her official chambers. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 hours, but Marcus felt as though he had aged years during that time. The following morning brought new challenges for Marcus. King Edmund was in an exceptionally good mood, speaking enthusiastically about a new trade agreement that Adrian had negotiated with a neighboring kingdom. The king's praise for his friend's diplomatic skills was effusive, and he spoke of increasing Adrian's responsibilities within the government. Marcus realized that Adrian's relationship with Isabella might be giving him undue influence over royal policy, adding potential treason to his list of sins. Princess Isabella appeared equally cheerful, though Marcus now noticed subtle signs that had previously escaped his attention. There was a glow about her that seemed to extend beyond her usual radiance, a particular brightness to her smile when Adrian was present in the room. She wore a new piece of jewelry, a delicate emerald pendant that Marcus had never seen before, and he couldn't help wondering if it was a gift from her lover. The most difficult moment came during the daily security briefing when King Edmund specifically thanked Marcus for his vigilance and dedication to protecting the royal family. The king's words were sincere and heartfelt, reflecting his complete trust in his captain of guards. Marcus felt each word of praise like a physical blow, knowing that he had betrayed that trust by facilitating the queen's affair, rather than protecting the king from the devastating truth. As the days passed, Marcus found himself trapped in an increasingly complex web of complicity. Each time he allowed the lovers to meet in secret, he became more deeply involved in their deception. Each lie he told to cover their activities bound him more tightly to their cause. He began to feel less like a protector of the crown, and more like a co-conspirator in its corruption. The weight of his secret knowledge was beginning to show in his appearance and behavior. Other guards commented on his recent moodiness and distraction. His sleeping patterns became irregular and his appetite diminished significantly. Marcus realized that his current path was unsustainable, but he still could not see a clear route to resolution that would not result in catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. 3 weeks after his initial discovery, Marcus's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. The strain of living with such a momentous secret while maintaining his professional duties was taking a visible toll. His lieutenant, Sir Thomas Hartwell, approached him with concerns about his recent performance and apparent distress. Thomas had served under Marcus for 8 years and had never seen his captain display such obvious signs of internal turmoil. The conversation with Thomas forced Marcus to confront the reality that his situation was becoming untenable. He could not continue indefinitely as both protector and enabler of the royal family's darkest secret. Something would have to give, and Marcus feared that when it did, the consequences would be catastrophic for everyone involved. His loyalty to the crown was being tested in ways that no oath of service could have prepared him for. During this period of increasing stress, Marcus began to notice additional details that painted an even more troubling picture of the affair. Isabella and Adrian had grown bolder in their meetings, sometimes spending 3 or 4 hours together in various private locations throughout the castle. They had developed an elaborate system of communication through their servants, none of whom seemed aware they were facilitating an illicit relationship. More concerning still was the discovery that their relationship appeared to involve financial arrangements that could constitute corruption. Marcus observed Adrian presenting Isabella with documents that she reviewed carefully before placing them in her private safe. The secretive nature of these exchanges suggested they might involve state funds or political agreements that bypassed proper channels of approval. The affair was potentially evolving into something that threatened not just the royal marriage but the integrity of the government itself. The breaking point came on a stormy Thursday evening in late autumn. King Edmund had departed earlier that day for a 3-day hunting expedition with several foreign diplomats, leaving Isabella ostensibly in charge of routine court matters. Almost immediately after the king's departure, Marcus noticed increased activity around the Queen's private chambers and unusual requests for altered security. Arrangements. Isabella had requested that the guards be reduced around her personal quarters for the entire duration of the king's absence, claiming she needed privacy to work on sensitive correspondence with foreign courts. The request was reasonable on its surface, but Marcus understood its true purpose. She was planning an extended rendezvous with Adrian, possibly lasting the entire time the king was away. The boldness of this plan shocked Marcus and demonstrated how reckless their passion had made them. That evening, Marcus watched as Adrian entered the royal chambers with enough personal belongings to suggest he planned to stay overnight. The sight of the king's best friend carrying what appeared to be sleeping clothes into the queen's private rooms, while her husband was away on state business, filled Marcus with a rage he had never experienced before. The sheer audacity and disrespect implicit in their actions finally pushed him past his breaking point. For the first time since discovering the affair, Marcus abandoned his post and walked directly to his quarters. He could no longer bear to be an observer, facilitator, or protector of what was happening. The conflict between his sworn duties and his personal conscience had become unbearable. In his chambers, he sat down and began writing a letter that he hoped he would never have to deliver. The letter was addressed to King Edmund and contained a detailed account of everything Marcus had witnessed over the past several weeks. He wrote with precision and care, documenting dates, times, locations, and specific observations that would leave no doubt about the nature of the relationship between Isabella and Adrian. The act of writing helped clarify his thoughts and confirmed his growing certainty that silence was no longer an acceptable option. As Marcus sealed the letter, he heard commotion in the courtyard below. Looking out his window, he saw torches and horses, far too many for a normal evening patrol or routine messenger service. His experienced eye immediately recognized the signs of an unexpected royal return. King Edmund had come back from his hunting expedition a full day early, and he was clearly not alone. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The king was returning to find his wife and best friend together, in circumstances that would be impossible to explain innocently. After weeks of secret meetings and careful deception, Isabella and Adrian were about to be discovered in the most compromising situation possible. There would be no way to minimize or excuse what Edmund would find when he reached his wife's chambers. Marcus realized he had perhaps 10 minutes before the king reached the royal quarters. He could warn Isabella and Adrian, giving them time to create some semblance of innocent explanation for their presence together. He could present himself to the king first and attempt to delay his progress to the queen's chambers. Or he could do nothing and allow events to unfold naturally, ending his weeks of moral torment but potentially triggering a crisis that could tear the kingdom apart. The decision proved easier than he had anticipated. Marcus took his sealed letter and walked quickly toward the main courtyard. His duty was to the crown and the kingdom, not to the individuals who wore its symbols. If Isabella and Adrian had chosen to risk everything for their passion, they would have to face the consequences of that choice. Marcus's role was to serve the institution of the monarchy, and that institution was better served by truth than by continued deception. In the courtyard, King Edmund was dismounting from his horse with obvious urgency. His early return had been prompted by news of a potential border dispute that required immediate attention. He was focused entirely on matters of state and had no suspicion whatsoever that his personal world was about to be shattered. Marcus approached his king with the letter in his hand and the weight of impending catastrophe in his heart. The next few minutes would determine not only the fate of the royal marriage, but potentially the stability of the entire kingdom of Valdoria. Marcus had spent weeks trying to avoid this moment, but circumstances had finally forced his hand. The time for neutrality and moral compromise had passed, and the moment of truth had finally arrived. Marcus approached King Edmund in the courtyard with measured steps, his heart pounding so violently he feared it might be audible. The king was surrounded by his hunting party and several travel-worn diplomats who were eager to discuss the border situation that had prompted their early return. Edmund's face showed the focused determination of a ruler preparing to handle a crisis, completely unaware that a far more personal catastrophe awaited him in his own castle. The moment stretched endlessly as Marcus drew near. He held the sealed letter in his hand, knowing that its contents would irrevocably change the course of Edmund's life, and potentially the fate of the kingdom. The weight of that knowledge made each step feel like walking through deep water, every movement requiring tremendous effort and will. Before Marcus could reach the king, however, a commotion erupted from the direction of the royal chambers. Shouts and the sound of running footsteps echoed across the courtyard, drawing everyone's attention toward the castle's main entrance. Marcus watched in horrified fascination as one of the younger guards came sprinting toward them, his face flushed with exertion and obvious distress. The guard reached King Edmund and immediately dropped to one knee, struggling to catch his breath enough to speak. The hunting party and diplomats pressed closer, sensing that something significant was happening. Marcus felt time slowing around him as he realized that events were unfolding beyond his control, that his carefully planned revelation was being overtaken by circumstances he had not anticipated. The young guard, finally able to speak, delivered news that struck the assembled group like lightning. There had been an incident in the Queen's chambers. Lady Isabella had been found unconscious, apparently having collapsed while working late at her desk. The castle physician had been summoned immediately, but her condition was serious enough that the guard had been sent to find the king with utmost urgency. King Edmund's reaction was immediate and visceral. All thoughts of border disputes and diplomatic matters vanished as he ran toward the castle, calling for his fastest horse to be saddled if needed for a quicker journey to his wife's side. The hunting party and diplomats followed, caught up in the sudden transformation from political crisis to personal emergency. Marcus found himself swept along with the group, the letter still clutched in his hand but now rendered meaningless by the turn of events. His mind raced as he tried to process what this development meant for Isabella, for Adrian, and for the secret he had been guarding. Was this collapse genuine, or was it some desperate attempt by the Queen to avoid discovery? Had Adrian managed to escape, or was he somehow involved in Isabella's condition? The royal chambers were in chaos when they arrived. Servants moved frantically under the direction of the castle physician, carrying water, linens, and various medical supplies. The Queen's personal maid stood weeping in the corridor, wringing her hands and speaking in fragmented sentences about finding her mistress collapsed on the floor of her study. King Edmund pushed through the crowd of servants and medical attendants to reach his wife's bedside. Isabella lay unconscious on her bed, her face pale and her breathing shallow but steady. The physician, an elderly man named Master Aldrich who had served the royal family for decades, was examining her carefully while explaining his preliminary findings to the king. According to Master Aldrich, the Queen appeared to have suffered some sort of severe shock or emotional trauma that had caused her to lose consciousness. There were no signs of physical injury or poisoning, but her body showed symptoms consistent with extreme distress. The physician recommended immediate rest and careful observation, though he admitted he was puzzled by the sudden onset of her condition. Marcus scanned the room carefully, looking for any sign of Adrian or evidence of their recent meeting. The study showed signs of hasty organization, papers scattered on the floor, an overturned inkwell, a chair positioned awkwardly away from the desk. It appeared that Isabella had indeed been working when something had happened to cause her collapse, but the disarray suggested there might have been more to the situation than simple overwork. The mystery deepened when one of the servants mentioned seeing Lord Adrian leaving the castle shortly before the Queen was discovered unconscious. According to the servant, Adrian had appeared agitated and had departed without explanation or formal leave-taking, which was highly unusual for someone of his position and normally meticulous attention to protocol. King Edmund's focus was entirely on his wife's welfare, But Marcus could see several of the court officials exchanging meaningful glances. Adrian's sudden departure in conjunction with the Queen's mysterious collapse was bound to generate speculation and rumors. The timing was particularly suspicious, given that everyone knew the king had been away and that Isabella and Adrian often worked together on various court matters. As the evening progressed, and Isabella remained unconscious, Marcus found himself in an increasingly complicated position. He still possessed written evidence of the affair, but presenting it while the Queen lay ill seemed both cruel and potentially dangerous to her health. Yet keeping the secret while the king worried frantically about his wife's condition felt equally wrong. The situation became even more complex when a messenger arrived with word that Lord Adrian had been found dead, approximately 2 miles from the castle. His horse had apparently thrown him while he was riding at dangerous speed in the darkness, and his neck had been broken in the fall. The news hit the assembled court like a thunderbolt, adding tragedy to an already mysterious and troubling evening. King Edmund received the news of his best friend's death with visible shock and grief. The loss of Adrian, combined with his wife's unexplained illness, seemed to age him by years in the span of minutes. He moved between Isabella's bedside and the window, struggling to process the dual catastrophes that had struck his family and his government simultaneously. Marcus watched these developments with growing unease. Adrian's death was almost certainly not accidental. The timing and circumstances suggested a man fleeing in panic rather than someone taking a casual evening ride. But what had caused him to run? Had Isabella threatened to confess their affair? Had she suffered her collapse after confronting him about their relationship? Or was there some other explanation for the chain of events that had led to this tragic conclusion? The letter in Marcus's pocket suddenly felt like both a solution and a potential disaster. It contained the truth about Isabella and Adrian's relationship, but revealing that truth now would devastate a grieving king and potentially destroy a woman who might be fighting for her life. Yet keeping it secret seemed to dishonor Adrian's memory and leave important questions unanswered about the events of this terrible night. 3 days passed before Princess Isabella regained consciousness, 3 days during which the entire kingdom of Valdoria held its breath waiting for news of their beloved queen's recovery. King Edmund barely left her bedside, taking meals in her chamber and conducting only the most essential royal business from a chair beside her bed. The depth of his devotion and anguish was evident to everyone who saw him during those long hours of vigil. Marcus spent those same 3 days wrestling with the most difficult decision of his career. The letter remained in his possession, its contents burning in his consciousness like a brand. Adrian was dead, buried with full honors as befitted the king's closest advisor and friend. Isabella lay unconscious, possibly dying, while her husband grieved for both his wife and his best friend simultaneously. The truth Marcus carried could destroy what remained of Edmund's world, or potentially help him understand the tragic events that had unfolded. When Isabella finally opened her eyes on the 4th morning, her first words were a whispered apology to her husband. She spoke of being overwhelmed by the pressures of court life, of working too hard on charitable projects, of neglecting her own health in service to the kingdom. Her explanation was vague but plausible, and Edmund accepted it with the relief of a man who had feared losing everything he held dear. Marcus observed the reunion from his position near the chamber door, noting details that others missed in their joy at the Queen's recovery. Isabella's eyes held a haunted quality that went beyond mere physical illness. When she asked about Adrian, her voice carried a note of desperate hope that was quickly crushed when Edmund gently broke the news of his friend's death. Her reaction, a sharp intake of breath followed by silent tears, spoke of grief that exceeded appropriate mourning for a family friend. Over the following weeks, as Isabella slowly recovered her strength, Marcus watched her carefully for signs of how she would handle the new reality. Adrian was gone, their secret seemingly buried with him, and she had survived what appeared to be a complete emotional and physical breakdown triggered by the crisis of potentially being discovered. The question remained whether she would view this as a warning to reform her behavior, or as a narrow escape that required better concealment in the future. The answer came gradually through small observations and overheard conversations. Isabella threw herself into charitable work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as if trying to atone for her past actions through good deeds. She became more affectionate toward King Edmund, more attentive to his needs, more present in court functions and state ceremonies. To outside observers, the near loss of the Queen had strengthened the royal marriage and renewed Isabella's commitment to her duties. But Marcus noticed other details that told a different story. Late at night, when she thought no one was watching, Isabella would stand at her window looking out toward the place where Adrian had died, her face showing the kind of grief reserved for lost lovers rather than departed friends. She wore the emerald pendant constantly now, touching it unconsciously during difficult moments as if it were a talisman connecting her to happier times. More troubling were the political implications that began to emerge as the kingdom adjusted to Adrian's absence. Several diplomatic agreements he had been negotiating fell apart without his personal involvement. Trade deals that had seemed certain were suddenly in jeopardy. It became clear that Adrian's influence and effectiveness had extended far beyond what anyone had realized, and his loss created a power vacuum that various court factions rushed to fill. Marcus began to suspect that Adrian's value to Isabella might have extended beyond romantic attachment. The man had been exceptionally skilled at managing complex political situations, and his private access to the Queen could have given him insights and influence that made him invaluable for advancing certain policies or interests. His death had eliminated not just Isabella's lover, but potentially her most important political ally and advisor. 6 months after the tragedy, King Edmund announced that Isabella was with child. The news brought great joy to the kingdom and seemed to complete the healing process that had begun with her recovery from illness. The royal couple appeared more devoted to each other than ever before, and Isabella's pregnancy was seen as a sign of divine blessing on their renewed union. Marcus found himself wondering about the timing of the pregnancy and whether it might represent Isabella's way of ensuring her position and deflecting any lingering suspicions about her relationship with Adrian. A royal heir would strengthen her standing immeasurably and provide her with purposes and responsibilities that would make any future indiscretions far more difficult to pursue. As the months passed, Marcus made his final decision about the letter he had carried for so long. On a quiet spring morning, he built a small fire in his private chambers and fed the sealed envelope to the flames. He watched the paper curl and blacken, taking with it the documented evidence of an affair that had ended in death and tragedy. Some secrets, he decided, were too dangerous to preserve, too painful to reveal, and too destructive to allow into history. Isabella gave birth to a son that autumn, a healthy child who was immediately proclaimed heir to the throne. King Edmund's joy was boundless, and the entire kingdom celebrated the continuation of the royal bloodline. The baby bore a strong resemblance to his father, though Marcus thought he could detect subtle features that reminded him of Adrian. Whether this resemblance was real or merely his imagination influenced by guilty knowledge, he would never know for certain. Years passed, and the events of that terrible autumn night faded into palace legend. New guards joined the service, new courtiers arrived to fill the void left by Adrian's death, and new challenges arose to occupy the attention of the royal family. Isabella matured into a queen whose wisdom and compassion became legendary throughout the realm. Her son grew into an intelligent and strong young prince who would one day make an excellent king. Marcus continued to serve as captain of the royal guard, his loyalty to the crown never wavering despite the burden of knowledge he had carried and ultimately chosen to destroy. He trained new guards, protected new secrets, and maintained the security of a royal family that had survived its darkest crisis and emerged stronger for it. Sometimes he wondered if his decision to burn the letter had been wise, but he never regretted it. On rare quiet evenings, when the castle was peaceful and his duties light, Marcus would walk past the study where he had first discovered the affair that changed everything. The room had been renovated after Isabella's recovery, transformed from a private workspace into a public reception hall, where the Queen met with charitable organizations and visiting dignitaries. It seemed fitting that a place of secrecy and deception had become a symbol of openness and service to the kingdom. King Edmund ruled for many more years, never learning the truth about his wife's relationship with his best friend. He mourned Adrian's death as the loss of a brother, preserved his memory with monuments and annual ceremonies, and often spoke of how much their friendship had meant to him. In his ignorance, he found peace and continued happiness that knowledge might have destroyed forever. Isabella kept her secrets until the end of her days, taking them to her grave along with whatever guilt or regret she may have felt about the choices that led to Adrian's death and her own near destruction. She became a beloved figure in the kingdom's history, remembered for her charitable works, her devotion to her family, and her role in establishing several institutions that served the poor and disadvantaged. Long after her death, Marcus lived to see Prince Edmund ascend to the throne and prove himself a worthy successor to his father. The young king showed all the noble qualities of the royal bloodline along with a wisdom and compassion that marked him as destined for greatness. Whether he carried any legacy from Adrian in his bloodline remained a mystery that Marcus took to his own grave, another secret buried in service to the crown he had sworn to protect. The kingdom of Valdoria prospered under 3 generations of wise rule, its royal family becoming a model of stability and virtue that other nations sought to emulate. The scandals and tragedies that might have destroyed it were absorbed into its history like drops of water into an ocean, leaving barely a ripple on the surface of its enduring strength and prosperity.